I watched in horror as Karen Mitchell, our HOA president, stood knee-deep in MY Private Lake with a massive industrial pump, draining thousands of gallons of crystal-clear water that had taken decades to accumulate. The sound of that pump echoing across my property at 6 a.m. felt like nails on a chalkboard. She didn't see me watching from my kitchen window, coffee mug frozen halfway to my lips, as she directed 2 hired contractors to position additional pumps along my shoreline. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I owned the dam. Not just the lake, the entire dam system that fed water to half the neighborhood, including her precious $1 million lakefront property 3 houses down. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this nightmare began, because Karen Mitchell didn't start as my enemy. In fact, 6 months earlier, I'd actually voted for her as HOA president. It was March when I first moved into Willow Creek Estates, a supposedly peaceful lakefront community in northern Georgia. The realtor, Janet, had been practically giddy as she showed me around my new 3-acre property. And THIS, she'd said, gesturing dramatically toward the shimmering lake that stretched across my backyard, is your private lake. Completely yours, fed by natural springs and that old dam system from the 1940s. I remember asking about the dam specifically. Janet had pulled out a thick folder of property documents. See here? The previous owner, old Mr. Henderson, owned not just this house and lake, but the entire dam infrastructure. When the neighborhood was developed around it in the 1980s, he kept the dam rights. Smart man. Now those rights transfer to you. I should have paid more attention to that conversation, should have understood the full implications of what she was telling me. But at the time, I was just a 34-year-old software engineer from Atlanta, tired of city life, looking for peace and quiet by the water. The house was perfect, a beautiful cedar cabin with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake, a private dock, and more tranquility than I'd ever experienced. The first few months were blissful. I'd wake up to the sound of loons calling across the water, spend my evenings fishing from the dock, and work remotely from my home office with the most incredible view imaginable. The neighbors seemed friendly enough. There was Tom and Linda Rodriguez next door, a retired couple who'd wave from their garden. The Johnsons across the street had 2 golden retrievers that would bound over to say hello during my morning walks. And then there was Karen Mitchell. I first met Karen at the monthly HOA meeting in June. She was a striking woman in her early 50s, with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of designer clothing that screamed, "I have money, and I want you to know it." She'd just been elected HOA president, and she ran that meeting like a corporate boardroom. "Welcome to Willow Creek Estates," she'd said, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm sure you'll find our community standards comprehensive." That should have been my first red flag. The trouble started small, as these things always do. In July, I received my first violation notice. Apparently, my dock needed to be pressure washed to maintain community aesthetic standards. The violation came with a $150 fine and a demand that the work be completed within 72 hours. I was confused. My dock looked fine weathered cedar that matched the natural lakefront environment perfectly. But I paid the fine and hired a pressure washing service, chalking it up to new homeowner learning curve. 2 weeks later, another violation. This time, Karen claimed my watercraft storage violated HOA regulations. The watercraft in question? My single kayak, which I kept on a simple rack beside my dock. According to Section 12.7 of the HOA covenant, Karen had written in her formal violation letter, all watercraft must be stored in enclosed structures or removed from visible property areas. I called her directly. "Karen, it's just one kayak. And according to my property deed, I own down to the waterline. How can you regulate what I keep on my own land?" Her laugh was cold. "Oh, sweetheart. You may own the land, but you agreed to HOA covenants when you purchased. We have standards here. This isn't some backwoods fishing camp." The condescension in her voice made my jaw clench, but I built a small shed for the kayak anyway. Anything to keep the peace. But Karen wasn't done. Not even close. August brought 3 more violations in rapid succession. My non-conforming mailbox, it was cedar to match my house, my excessive outdoor lighting, a single lamppost by my driveway, and my personal favorite, unauthorized vegetation management, because I'd planted native wildflowers along my shoreline instead of the HOA-approved landscaping package. Each violation came with escalating fines. $150 became $300, then $500. By September, I'd paid over $2,000 in HOA fines for the crime of living on my own property. That's when I started paying attention to what was really happening. During my morning coffee ritual, I began watching Karen's daily routine with new eyes. She would walk her perfectly groomed standard poodle, Princess, along the neighborhood streets every morning at exactly 7:30 a.m. But she never just walked past my house. She would stop, take photos of my property with her phone, make notes in a small leather journal. One morning, I watched her spend 20 minutes examining my dock, measuring distances with a tape measure, and taking what looked like survey photos from multiple angles. When she spotted me watching from my window, she didn't wave or look embarrassed. She stared right back, defiant, before walking away. That afternoon, violation notice number 7 appeared in my mailbox. Dock extension exceeds property boundaries by 3.2 feet. Immediate removal required or face daily fines of $200. This was insane. My dock had been built by the previous owner 15 years ago, and every property survey showed it was well within my boundaries. But the next morning, there was Karen again, this time with a man in a survey vest, pointing at my dock and gesturing animatedly. I decided it was time to fight back. The county courthouse in Dawsonville became my second office for the next 2 weeks. I pulled every property record, deed, survey, and historical document related to not just my land, but the entire Willow Creek Estates development. What I discovered would have been hilarious if it wasn't so infuriating. Karen Mitchell didn't just live in a lakefront house 3 properties down from me. She lived in THA Lakefront House, the most expensive property in the development, worth close to $1.2 million. Her panoramic lake views, her private beach area, her boat lift, all of it depended entirely on the water level of MY Lake. But here's the kicker. My lake wasn't fed by natural springs like the realtor had told me. It was fed by an elaborate dam and spillway system that controlled water flow from a much larger reservoir system upstream. And according to every document in the courthouse, I owned that entire dam system. Not just owned it, I was legally responsible for its maintenance and had complete control over its operation. Karen's million-dollar lakefront paradise existed entirely at my discretion. The more I researched, the clearer Karen's strategy became. She'd been systematically targeting me with bogus violations, trying to make life so miserable that I'd sell and move away. Why? Because she wanted to purchase my property to expand her own estate. I found the smoking gun in the county planning office, a preliminary development proposal submitted by Karen Mitchell to consolidate and improve lakefront properties for enhanced community value. She was trying to force me out so she could buy my land cheap and create her own private lakefront compound. But she'd made one critical error. She had no idea I controlled her water supply. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for October 15th. I marked my calendar and started planning. For the next 3 weeks, I played the part of the defeated new homeowner. I dutifully paid Karen's ridiculous fines. I removed the non-conforming elements from my property. I even sent her a polite email asking if there were any other violations I should address proactively. Her response was swift and smug. "I'm sure we can find a solution that works for everyone. Perhaps you should consider whether lakefront living is really the right fit for your lifestyle." Meanwhile, I was busy learning everything about dam operation, water rights law, and the specific mechanics of my dam system. The original construction documents from 1947 showed a beautifully engineered setup with multiple spillway gates, flow controls, and even an emergency drainage system. More importantly, I discovered that my dam didn't just feed my lake. It controlled water flow to Willow Creek itself, which fed the larger lake system that supported Karen's property and 4 other expensive lakefront homes. On October 14th, the day before the HOA meeting, I took a drive up to my dam for the first time since moving in. It was hidden in a forested area about half a mile upstream from my house, accessed by an old gravel road that started at the back corner of my property. The dam was magnificent, a curved concrete structure about 40 feet high, holding back a substantial reservoir. The spillway system was more complex than I'd imagined, with multiple gates and channels that could direct water flow in various directions. Everything was still functional, just waiting for someone who understood how to operate it. I spent the afternoon reading the operation manual I'd found in the county archives, testing the gate controls, and familiarizing myself with every valve and lever. By evening, I felt confident I could control water flow with surgical precision. The HOA meeting started at 7 p.m. in the community clubhouse. I arrived fashionably early and took a seat in the back row, notepad in hand like the diligent homeowner I was pretending to be. Karen ran the meeting with her usual iron fist, discussing landscaping standards, parking regulations, and architectural compliance with military precision. When she reached new business, her eyes found mine across the room. "I'd like to address some ongoing compliance issues with one of our newer residents," she announced, her voice carrying that familiar, condescending tone. "We've been working with Mr. Chen to help him understand our community standards. But unfortunately, we're still seeing repeated violations." She proceeded to read a list of my supposed infractions, including several new ones I'd never heard of. According to Karen, my property was now in violation for excessive dock lighting, a single solar light, non-compliant window treatments. My blinds were apparently the wrong color, and unauthorized water feature modifications. That last one caught my attention. "Could you clarify what you mean by water feature modifications, Karen?" Her smile was predatory. "Well, we've noticed that water levels in your lake seem inconsistent. The community's lakefront property values depend on maintaining consistent water levels throughout our connected lake system. We may need to discuss community oversight of water management to protect everyone's property investments." The room fell silent. Several neighbors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Karen was essentially announcing her intention to take control of my lake. I stood up slowly, keeping my voice calm and professional. "That's an interesting point, Karen. Water management is indeed crucial for lakefront property values. Speaking of which, I've been doing some research into our local water systems, and I've learned some fascinating things about how our lake system actually works." Karen's confident expression flickered for just a moment. "Oh? Did you know that our entire lake system is fed by a dam upstream? It's quite an impressive piece of engineering from the 1940s. The water flow can be controlled with remarkable precision." "I'm sure that's educational," Karen said dismissively. "But I don't see how historical trivia relates to current compliance issues." I smiled. "Well, here's the thing, Karen. I own that dam." The silence that followed was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop in that room. Karen's perfectly composed mask slipped completely, revealing a flash of panic before she recovered. "That's That's not possible. Community water resources can't be privately owned. I pulled out a folder, thick with documents. Actually, they can be, and they are. I have the deeds, the historical ownership records, and the legal documentation going back to 1947. Would you like me to read the relevant sections aloud? Karen's face had gone from confident to pale in a matter of seconds. This meeting isn't the appropriate venue for. Oh, but I think it is, I interrupted. Especially since you just announced your intention to take community control over water management. See, here's what's really interesting about dam ownership. I opened my folder and began reading from the legal documents. The owner of said dam system shall have complete and exclusive control over water flow, reservoir levels, and distribution to downstream properties. No municipal, community, or private entity may override these controls without explicit written permission from the legal dam owner. The color had completely drained from Karen's face now. Around the room, I could see other homeowners beginning to understand the implications. Furthermore, I continued, the dam owner is not required to maintain any specific water levels for downstream properties and may modify water flow as deemed necessary for dam maintenance, safety, or personal property management. Karen tried to regain control of the situation. Even if this is true, you can't just… You wouldn't dare. Wouldn't dare what, Karen? Manage my own property? Exercise my legal rights? Or maybe you're worried I might do something like, let's say, drain the lake system for essential dam maintenance? The threat hung in the air like smoke. Every lakefront property owner in that room was suddenly doing mental math, calculating what their million-dollar lake views would be worth if they were looking at empty mudflats instead of sparkling water. Now then, I said, closing my folder and sitting back down, I believe you were discussing compliance issues? Please continue. But Karen was done. The meeting ended abruptly with mumbled excuses about reviewing procedures and scheduling follow-up discussions. As people filed out, I could hear whispered conversations and see worried glances in my direction. Karen approached me as I was packing up my documents. Her earlier confidence had been replaced by barely controlled fury. "You think you're clever," she hissed, keeping her voice low enough that the remaining stragglers couldn't hear. "But you have no idea who you're dealing with. I've lived in this community for 12 years. I have connections, influence, resources you can't even imagine." I looked up at her calmly. "Karen, I'm just a software engineer who wants to live peacefully on his own property. But if you continue harassing me with bogus violations, well, I might need to start taking my dam maintenance responsibilities more seriously." Her eyes narrowed. "You're bluffing." "Am I? Tell you what, keep sending me violation notices, and we'll find out together." That night, I couldn't sleep. Part of me felt exhilarated by finally standing up to Karen's bullying. But another part of me knew I just declared war on someone who clearly didn't lose gracefully. I was right to be worried. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of machinery. Heavy machinery. I stumbled to my kitchen window, still half asleep, and couldn't believe what I was seeing. Karen was standing in my lake with industrial pumps, draining my water. But that's where we started this story, isn't it? And now you know why that image of Karen Mitchell hip deep in my lake, directing contractors to steal my water, filled me with such cold rage. I threw on clothes and stormed outside. "What the hell do you think you're doing on my property?" Karen looked up from where she was directing the pump placement, completely unapologetic. "Emergency water management, sweetie. Since you've made it clear you can't be trusted to maintain proper water levels, the HOA is taking temporary control." Temporary control of MY property? This is trespassing, theft, and probably about 6 other felonies. "Actually," Karen said, pulling out a folded document, "this is completely legal. HOA Emergency Powers Provision, Section 18.3. When community property values are threatened by individual negligence, the association can take temporary protective measures. I snatched the paper from her hands. It was official-looking legal letterhead, but something felt wrong about it. This is garbage, Karen. You can't just... I can, and I am. And if you try to interfere with essential community maintenance, I'll have you arrested for obstruction. The two contractors kept working, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation, but unwilling to stop until someone told them to. One of the pumps was massive industrial grade, capable of moving thousands of gallons per hour. I pulled out my phone and started recording. For the record, Karen Mitchell is currently trespassing on private property and stealing water from my lake without permission or legal authority. Karen smiled for the camera. Just protecting community interests from an unstable property owner who's threatened to drain our lake system. That's when I realized what she was doing. She was creating a narrative. In her version of events, I was the unhinged neighbor who'd threatened everyone's property values, and she was the responsible community leader taking protective action. Clever. Diabolical, but clever. You know what, Karen? You're absolutely right. Water management is important. In fact, I think it's time I took a more active role in maintaining my dam system. Her smile faltered slightly. What do you mean? Well, you've made it clear that current water levels are problematic. Maybe it's time for a complete system flush and restart. You know, drain everything, inspect all the infrastructure, make sure we're operating at peak efficiency. The color started draining from Karen's face again. You can't. The other homeowners will understand that proper maintenance requires proper procedures. I'm sure you'll explain to everyone that your emergency water management action made a complete system overhaul necessary. I turned to the contractors. Gentlemen, you're going to want to stop what you're doing. This woman has no legal authority to be on this property, and you're about to be accessories to theft and trespassing. The older contractor looked between Karen and me nervously. Ma'am, maybe we should verify the paperwork before we continue. Keep pumping. Karen snapped. I'll handle the legal issues. But I was already walking away, phone in hand. Not to call the police that would come later. First, I had a dam to operate. The drive up to my dam felt like the longest half-mile of my life. Behind me, I could hear the industrial pumps continuing to work, draining my lake. But they were removing water faster than they could possibly handle the flow I was about to release. The dam's control system was beautifully simple once you understood it. The main spillway gate controlled the primary flow to my lake. A secondary channel fed the creek that supplied Karen's lake system, and an emergency spillway designed for flood control could divert massive amounts of water directly into the main creek system, bypassing both lakes entirely. I started with the secondary channel. A few turns of the valve wheel, and Karen's water supply dropped to a trickle. Not completely off, I wasn't trying to destroy property or hurt anyone, but reduced to maybe 10% of normal flow. Then I opened my main spillway gate completely. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Water that had been slowly trickling into my lake became a rushing torrent. The lake level began rising fast enough that you could actually watch it climb. But here's the beautiful part. Karen's pumps, designed to drain a lake, were suddenly fighting against a massive influx of fresh water. It was like trying to empty a bathtub with a teaspoon while someone else was filling it with a fire hose. I could hear the pumps struggling from half a mile away, their engines working harder as they fought against the increasing water pressure. After about 10 minutes, I heard the first engine overheat and shut down with a mechanical groan that echoed across the forest. By the time I walked back to my property, Karen was standing waist-deep in water that was rising faster than she could retreat. The second pump had overheated and died. The contractors were frantically trying to pull their equipment out of the lake before it was completely submerged. "Turn it off!" Karen screamed when she saw me. "Turn off whatever you did." "Turn off what?" I asked innocently. "I'm just performing routine dam maintenance, remember? You said water management was crucial." "This is insane. You're flooding my equipment?" I looked at the contractors, who were now chest-deep in rapidly rising water, struggling to drag their expensive pumps toward shore. "Gentlemen, I'd move faster if I were you. This is just the beginning of the system flush." Karen stumbled toward shore, soaking wet and furious. "I'll sue you. This is property damage. Intentional flooding. Actually, this is proper dam operation according to the maintenance schedule I found in the county archives. Apparently, the previous owner was supposed to do a complete system flush every 5 years. The last one was in 2010, so we're overdue. You can't just flood the neighborhood." "I'm not flooding anything. I'm filling MY Lake to its proper levels and performing essential maintenance on MY Dam. The fact that you were stealing my water with illegal pumps when I started maintenance? Well, that's not really my problem, is it?" The contractors finally managed to drag their equipment to dry land, but both pumps were completely waterlogged. Thousands of dollars in machinery ruined because Karen thought she could steal water from someone who controlled the source. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. As Karen stood dripping on my shoreline, I pulled out my phone and started recording again. "Karen, could you explain to everyone why you were trespassing on private property this morning? Stop recording me. I'm documenting the attempted theft of water from my private lake, as well as the trespassing that occurred on my property." For legal purposes, Karen's wet hair was plastered to her head, her designer clothes were soaked through, and her makeup had run in dark streaks down her face. She looked nothing like the composed HOA president who'd been terrorizing me for months. "You haven't won anything," she snarled. "This isn't over." "You're absolutely right," I agreed. "Because now I need to document the damage your illegal pumps did to my lake ecosystem. I'll need to file police reports for trespassing and theft. And of course, I'll need to inform your insurance company that you're liable for the environmental damage caused by your unauthorized water extraction." Karen's eyes widened as she began to understand the full scope of what she'd walked into. "Oh, and Karen? Since you've made it clear that you don't respect property boundaries or legal water rights, I think it's best if I maintain tighter control over my dam operations going forward." "What does that mean?" I smiled. "It means your lake level is about to become much more variable." That afternoon, while Karen was probably at home changing into dry clothes and trying to salvage her damaged equipment, I went back to my dam and began implementing what I privately called the Variable Lake Management Protocol. Instead of maintaining steady water flow to the downstream lake system, I started adjusting it throughout the day. Not dramatically, I wasn't trying to cause property damage, but enough to make lakefront living significantly less pleasant for certain residents. Morning flow reduced to 60% of normal. Karen's lake level would drop just enough that her boat lift would scrape bottom. Midday flow increased to 120% of normal. Her shoreline would flood slightly, making her private beach unusable. Evening flow back to 75% of normal, but with irregular fluctuations every hour. The effect was subtle but devastating for someone who'd spent 12 years enjoying perfectly consistent lake conditions. Karen's million-dollar lakefront paradise had become an unpredictable, unusable mess. But the real beauty of my system was that it only affected the downstream properties that relied on my water flow. My own lake remained perfectly stable, fed directly from the main reservoir. The phone calls started on day 2 of variable lake management. First was Tom Rodriguez from next door. "Hey, Have you noticed anything weird with the lake levels lately? Our dock is sometimes underwater and sometimes high and dry. Then Linda Johnson called. The strangest thing, our shoreline keeps changing. Yesterday I could walk on our beach. Today it's completely flooded. But the most interesting call came from Karen herself. "What do you want?" she demanded without preamble. "Good morning to you too, Karen. How's the lake today?" You know exactly how the lake is. This is harassment. This is terrorism. Terrorism? That's a strong word for routine dam maintenance. Routine maintenance doesn't involve changing water levels 6 times a day. Actually, it does when you're flushing sediment, testing flow rates, and adjusting for seasonal variations. It's all very technical. You wouldn't understand. The silence on the other end of the line was murderous. When Karen finally spoke, her voice was deadly quiet. "Name your price." "I'm sorry?" "Don't play dumb. How much do you want to stop this? Money? Property? What's your price?" And there it was. Karen Mitchell, the woman who'd spent 4 months terrorizing me with bogus violations and fines, was now trying to buy her way out of the consequences of her own actions. "Karen, I don't want your money. I just want to live peacefully on my property without harassment." "Fine. No more violation. Clean slate. Just stop messing with the water levels." "Oh, but Karen, you don't get to negotiate anymore. See, you've made it very clear that you don't respect property rights or legal boundaries. So now I have to protect my interests more, actively." "What does that mean?" "It means your lake level depends entirely on my goodwill. And right now, my goodwill is pretty limited." I hung up before she could respond. Days 3 through 7 of variable lake management brought increasingly frantic calls from the other lakefront property owners. They'd started to figure out that something was wrong, but they hadn't yet connected it to their HOA president's war with the new neighbor. That changed on day 8. I was having my morning coffee, watching Karen's lake fluctuate between high and low tide, like some kind of freshwater ocean, when I saw a small crowd gathering on her property. Tom and Linda Rodriguez, the Johnsons, and 2 other couples I didn't recognize, were standing on Karen's dock, pointing at the water level and having what looked like a heated discussion. Karen was gesticulating wildly, clearly trying to explain something. But even from my distant vantage point, I could see the other homeowners weren't buying whatever she was selling. Around noon, Tom Rodriguez knocked on my door. "Hey neighbor," he said, but his usual friendly demeanor was strained. "Could we talk for a minute?" "Of course. Come on in. Coffee?" We sat at my kitchen table, looking out at my perfectly stable, beautiful lake. Tom stared at the consistent water level for a long moment before speaking. "So, Linda and I have been having some issues with our lake access lately." "Oh, what kind of issues?" "Water levels. Constantly changing. Our dock is useless. Sometimes it's underwater. Sometimes it's 6 feet above the waterline. We can't use our boat lift, can't walk on our beach, can't even predict what the shoreline will look like from day to day." I nodded sympathetically. "That sounds incredibly frustrating. The thing is, your lake looks perfect. Consistent levels, clean water, no fluctuations. And you're upstream from us, so you're wondering why your water situation is different from mine?" "Exactly." Tom leaned forward. "Karen claims it's some kind of natural seasonal variation, but that doesn't make sense. We've lived here 8 years, and nothing like this has ever happened before." I set down my coffee cup and looked at Tom seriously. "Can I trust you with something confidential?" "Of course. I own the dam that controls water flow to your lake system." Tom's eyes widened. "You? What?" I pulled out my now familiar folder of dam ownership documents. The property deed included all water rights and dam infrastructure upstream from here. I control the flow to every lakefront property in the neighborhood. But, but why would you change the water levels? We haven't done anything to you. You're right, Tom. You haven't done anything to me. Karen Mitchell, on the other hand, has spent the last 4 months harassing me with bogus HOA violations, trying to force me to sell my property so she can buy it cheap. I told Tom the whole story. The escalating violations, the excessive fines, Karen's obvious attempts to drive me out of the neighborhood. His expression grew darker with each detail. Last week, I continued, Karen trespassed on my property with industrial pumps and tried to steal water directly from my lake. When I stopped her, she threatened to sue me and claimed she had emergency authority to take control of my water resources. Jesus, Tom muttered. We knew she could be intense. But this is crazy. So I decided to exercise my legal rights as dam owner. Karen wants to control water management? Fine. But now she gets to live with the consequences of unstable water levels just like she tried to force on me. Tom was quiet for a long moment, processing everything I told him. The other lakefront owners. They don't know about any of this. No, and Karen's been telling them it's natural seasonal variation or some kind of environmental issue. But it's not. It's you, responding to what she did to you. That's correct. Tom rubbed his face with both hands. Look, I get why you're angry. If someone did that to Linda and me, I'd want revenge too. But our property values, our quality of life. We're getting caught in the crossfire of your war with Karen. I felt a pang of guilt. Tom and Linda were good people who didn't deserve to suffer because of Karen's vendetta against me. You're right, and I'm sorry you're dealing with the fallout. But Tom, Karen has made it clear she won't stop until she forces me out. How do I protect myself without using the only leverage I have? Maybe if the other homeowners knew what was really going on, we could put pressure on Karen to back down? You think they'd side with the new guy over their HOA president? I think they'd side with stable property values over Karen's personal grudges. That gave me an idea. A better idea than my current strategy of making everyone miserable until Karen gave up. Tom, when's the next HOA meeting? 2 weeks. November 15th. Perfect. I think it's time for some community education about local water management systems. We spent the next hour planning what Tom called Operation Water Rights. Instead of continuing to make life miserable for innocent neighbors, we would expose Karen's harassment campaign and give the community a choice. Continue supporting a president who was willing to destroy everyone's property values to settle personal scores, or elect new leadership that could negotiate a reasonable agreement with the dam owner. For the next 2 weeks, I maintained steady, consistent water levels for all the lakefront properties. Karen's lake returned to its normal, beautiful state. Her dock became usable again. Her shoreline stabilized. I could practically see the relief in the neighborhood. People started using their boats again. The evening dog walkers returned to the lakefront paths. Everything went back to the peaceful, scenic community I'd originally fallen in love with. But I could also see Karen's growing suspicion. She knew I was planning something, and the uncertainty was eating at her. Several times I caught her staring at my property from her own shoreline, phone in hand, probably trying to figure out my next move. She didn't have to wait long. The November 15th HOA meeting had the highest attendance in the community's history. Word had gotten out that there would be a special presentation on community water management issues. Every lakefront property owner was there, along with a dozen other neighbors who were curious about the recent lake-level problems. I arrived early and set up a laptop connected to the clubhouse's projection system. My presentation was titled Willow Creek Estates, Water Rights, a Community Education Seminar. Karen walked in at exactly 7 p.m., saw my setup, and went pale. She knew exactly what was about to happen. "Good evening, everyone," I began, as the meeting was called to order. "I'm here tonight to discuss some important information about how our lake system actually works and how recent events have affected everyone's property values." I clicked to my first slide, a detailed map of the local water system, showing my dam, my lake, and the downstream flow that fed everyone else's properties. As many of you have experienced over the past few weeks, our lake levels have been unpredictable. Tonight, I want to explain why that happened and what we can do to prevent it from happening again. Karen tried to interrupt. "This isn't on the agenda." "Actually, it is," Tom Rodriguez said from the front row. "I requested this presentation under the community education provision." Karen shot Tom a look of pure betrayal, but he stared back steadily. The battle lines were drawn. I spent the next 20 minutes walking through the history of our water system, the legal ownership of the dam, and the technical details of how water flow controlled lake levels throughout the neighborhood. The audience was fascinated. Most had lived here for years without understanding the engineering that made their lakefront paradise possible. Then I got to the recent problems. 3 weeks ago, someone trespassed on my property and attempted to drain my lake with industrial pumps. I clicked to a slide showing photos of Karen and the contractors in my lake. This unauthorized water theft forced me to take emergency measures to protect my property, which resulted in the unstable lake levels many of you experienced. Murmurs of surprise and concern rippled through the audience. This was the first time most people were hearing about Karen's failed pumping operation. But the trespassing and water theft weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a systematic harassment campaign designed to force me to sell my property below market value. I clicked to my next slide, a timeline of every violation notice Karen had sent me, along with photos of the supposed infractions. The kayak that needed to be hidden. The dock that was supposedly 3 feet over the property line. The wildflowers that violated landscaping standards. The room grew quieter as people began to understand the scope of Karen's campaign against me. In total, I was assessed over $3,000 in fines for violations that ranged from questionable to completely fabricated. The harassment escalated to the point where I was threatened with daily $200 fines for a dock that property surveys clearly showed was within my boundaries. I could see Karen across the room, her face cycling through emotions, anger, embarrassment, panic. She knew her reputation in the community was being systematically destroyed, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The harassment campaign culminated in the illegal attempt to drain my lake, which brings us to the current situation. I clicked to my final slide, a photo of the dam control system. As the legal owner of our community's water supply, I have complete control over lake levels for every property in this neighborhood. I can provide stable, consistent water levels that protect everyone's property values and quality of life. Or, I let the pause hang in the air. Or I can manage water levels in whatever way I deem necessary to protect my property from further harassment. The room was dead silent. Everyone understood exactly what is.